In 1830, William Hereford arrived in the wild frontier of Western Australia. Granted 400 hectares of land in Augusta, and later purchasing another 100, he built a life from the ground up. By the time he reached 65, Hereford had amassed a small fortune of $2,000 in cash and property. In 1851, he married Bridget Larkin, a widow with 6 children from her first marriage. But the union would prove anything but blissful. According to Hereford, Bridget was violent. At one point, he claimed she had knocked out several of his teeth during a heated argument. By February of 1855, after years of tension, he walked out, taking refuge at a neighbor's home and sharing a room with a farmhand named George Jones. For 6 weeks, he refused to return to his wife. He even bought another property, intending to live there, alone. But in late March, space at the neighbor's house became scarce. Hereford had no choice but to return to his matrimonial home. Jones came too, continuing to share his room. On April 8, 1855, Hereford wasn't feeling well. He complained of a cold, aches, and fatigue. That evening, Bridget offered him a glass of mulled wine. He accepted. She also sent word to Jones. Hereford wished to sleep alone that night. Her daughter was sent away as well. Hours later, George Jones found him in bed. The sheets were pulled up to his face. His eyes were wide open and protruding slightly. Across both sides of his neck were red marks. An inquest was quickly convened. Presiding over it was the coroner, who listened closely as Dr. Hannibal Bryan took the stand. Bryan's testimony was clear. William Hereford, he insisted, had died of natural causes. The official verdict reflected his words, death by natural causes. But within weeks, that conclusion would be shattered. Enoch Dodd, a local man, made a chilling confession to his friend, Philip Dixon. Dixon, already complicit in forging Hereford's will in favor of Bridget Larkin, listened as Dodd revealed the truth. Hereford had not died naturally. He had been murdered. According to Dodd, it was Larkin herself who had orchestrated it. She had poured him drink after drink, feeding his courage with alcohol. When he hesitated, when his resolve faltered, she stood over him, ensuring he saw the act through. As the fatal struggle unfolded, Larkin busied herself in the kitchen, deliberately making noise, masking the sounds of Hereford's final moments. On August 28, 1855, Bridget Larkin and Enoch Dodd were arrested and charged with the murder of William Hereford. Just over a month later, on October 3rd, the trial opened in the Court of General Quarter Sessions. The courtroom was packed, spectators eager to hear the details of a crime that had already gripped the colony. Dr. Hannibal Bryan took the stand for the defense. He testified that he had seen no signs of strangulation on Hereford's neck. But under cross-examination, the Crown exposed a startling truth. Bryan had never passed a medical examination. Worse still, he couldn't explain how to use a stethoscope. Then, on the trial's second day, a stunning twist. Bridget Larkin herself confessed to the murder. The verdict came swiftly. Both Larkin and Dodd were found guilty and sentenced to hang. The execution was carried out the following Monday at Perth Prison. Philip Dixon, who had forged Hereford's will, pleaded guilty to conspiracy and was transported to Van Diemen's Land for the rest of his life. Larkin and Dodd's deaths marked history. These were the first executions in the new Perth prison, and Bridget Larkin became the first woman ever to be hanged in Western Australia. In 1862, Patrick Halligan arrived in the booming gold town of Rockhampton, Australia. Fresh from Ireland with his new wife, Hannah, he quickly became a well-known figure, trading in gold, frequenting horse races, and running the Lion Creek Hotel on the town's outskirts. By 1869, Halligan had taken on a new venture, opening the Golden Age Hotel in the heart of Rockhampton's business district. But his former hotel, the Lion Creek, had passed into the hands of a man with a far darker reputation, Alexander Archibald. Archibald's history was checkered with allegations of crime, and soon, he devised a scheme, one that would end in blood. He knew Halligan traveled back from the Morindish gold fields carrying valuable gold. And so, with two accomplices, Jack Williams, and George Palmer, Archibald set his plan in motion. On the afternoon of April 25, 1869, Halligan rode into an ambush. Williams and Palmer stepped forward, demanding his gold. But Halligan refused. He drew his weapon and fired, missing his mark. Palmer's return shot tore into Halligan's chest. Still alive, Halligan was bound with rope. The robbers took his gold ring from his hand, and left him dying by the roadside. Hours later, under the cover of darkness, they returned, this time to dispose of his body. Weighted down, it sank beneath the dark waters of the Fitzroy River. When Halligan failed to return home, concern turned to alarm. Search parties combed the area, and soon, suspicion hardened into the belief that he had been murdered. The government offered a reward of $100 for the recovery of his body. It was found on May 7, 1869. Just one day later, Halligan was laid to rest in the South Rockhampton Cemetery. The investigation moved quickly. Palmer was arrested in Gympie, and soon all three men, Archibald, Williams, and Palmer, were in custody. In October of that year, they were each sentenced to death. On November 24th, during a violent morning thunderstorm, Palmer and Williams were hanged at Rockhampton Jail. Archibald followed a month later, after his claim of a promised pardon failed to save him. Their bodies were buried in the same cemetery as their victim. On Sunday, September 29, 1929, in Kansas City, Missouri, Myrtle and John Bennett spent the day with their upstairs neighbors, Charles and Myrna Hoffman. The morning was leisurely, a round of golf for the husbands at the Indian Hills Country Club. By afternoon, the wives joined in for another round. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the two couples returned to Bennett's apartment in the upscale country club district. They shared dinner, laughter, and then a game of bridge. At first, it was light-hearted fun, the Hoffmans versus the Bennetts. But as midnight passed and the Hoffmans pulled ahead, tensions flared. The final hand was dealt. John failed to make his 4 spades contract. Myrtle's patience snapped. "You're a bum bridge player," she told him. In a flash, John rose from his chair and slapped her again and again in front of their guests. Humiliated, Myrtle turned to the Hoffmans. Only a cur would strike a woman in front of guests. John packed a bag, mocking her as he moved from room to room, announcing he'd spend the night in St. Joseph. Then, almost casually, he told Myrtle to fetch the handgun he carried on the road for protection. Still sobbing, Myrtle walked to her mother's bedroom, opened a drawer of linens, and pulled out his .32 Colt semi-automatic. Moments later, she brushed past Charles Hoffman, stepped into the den, and fired twice, hitting John in the back as he stood in the bathroom. Wounded, he staggered into the hallway, only to collapse in the living room, dying on the floor. It was February 23, 1931, in Kansas City's Jackson County Courthouse, where Myrtle Bennett's murder trial was about to begin. Presiding over the case was Judge Ralph S. Latshaw. Her defense attorney was no ordinary lawyer, James A. Reed, a former 3-term U.S. Senator and one-time Democratic presidential candidate. Reed's strategy was clear: paint John Bennett as a man with a history of violence and abuse, and convince the jury that Myrtle was either driven to insanity or acted in self-defense. But tensions in the courtroom ran high. When the prosecution, led by James R. Page, attempted to call John Bennett's nephew, Bird Rice, to the stand, the judge blocked the move. Rice hadn't been listed as an official witness, and the testimony was barred. For 11 days, the trial gripped the city. And then, after 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its decision: not guilty. Outside the courthouse, Assistant Prosecutor John Hill summed up the shock felt by many. "It looks like it's an open season on husbands." When the jury acquitted her, Myrtle Bennett was just 35 years old. She would live another 61 years, passing away in January of 1992 at the age of 96 in Miami, Florida. After the trial, she disappeared from public eye. The headlines stopped, and she never remarried or had children. By the late 1940s, Myrtle had reinvented herself in New York City. She became the executive head of housekeeping at the luxurious Carlisle Hotel, living alone in a small apartment within its walls. Here, she mingled effortlessly with the rich and famous, forming friendships with Hollywood icons like Mary Pickford and Buddy Rogers, and even Henry Ford II. In later years, she traveled the world for a hotel chain and continued to play bridge, the very game that had sparked the tragedy, until nearly the end of her life. When Myrtle Bennett died, her estate was worth over $1 million. And in a final twist, with no children of her own, she left the bulk of her fortune to the family of the very man she had killed more than 6 decades earlier.